I do not feel good. I do not feel better. I am dead. And I do not feel.
Okay, so I've done the Bleak Cabal and I've done the Doomguard, so I'm going to complete the triumvirate of fatality by talking about another great Planescape faction, the Dustmen. The Dustmen, also known as the Dead, are a group that believe, fundamentally, that the entire multiverse, the inner planes, the prime material planes, everything around them, is actually where people go after they die. And that everyone in the universe is actually already dead. They focus on the fact that life, they say, should be about happiness, joy, positive things, good things. But life is uniformly not like that in their eyes. And they think that everything around us is not the real world. It's all some form of the afterlife. But everyone, even the gods, are already dead, and they're in some sort of weird fantasy world, almost in a weird meta kind of way. Like they're saying that the entire Dungeons & Dragons universe is really just made up and a place people go in their minds where they die. The beginnings of the Dustmen are really focused on a kind of negative or fatalist interpretation of Buddhism, I think. The critics of Buddhism have for many centuries now pointed out that it feels like a very fatalistic and death-obsessed sort of religion. The Dustmen, like the Bleak Cabal, are people that have rejected the physical in favor of the spiritual or the mental, depending on what you want to think. They don't really see the world as being, the material world that is, and the physical world as being worthwhile. They're sort of pulled back, like Buddhists have in a very dualist sort of way about the mind and the body. The physical world is unclean, impure, and bad, and really what we're trying to achieve is a kind of nirvana or death. In Buddhism, you're trying to break the cycle of rebirth, and that's exactly what the Dustmen are trying to do. They don't want to be reborn again and again and again in a world where they think they're ultimately dead. They want to achieve something they call the true death, a sort of real, perfect death where we're extinguished completely and do not have to worry about this constant cycle of living. In a very negative interpretation of Buddhism, that's what they want to do. Also. They think that life is not made up of nothing but suffering, and the way out of this is to abandon all desire and eventually reach a state of nirvana and erase your cycle of rebirth so you'll no longer have to exist in the physical world, in a sort of Cathar-ish sort of way, too. In order to do this, the Buddhists to some degree, and the Dustmen especially, believe that they have to live without emotion. That's a fundamental tenet of what they believe. They have to live without all of the drives and the focus of their existence. They have to live in a sort of perfect, unemotional, almost undead sort of vacuum, away from all of those petty attachments and desires in a very Buddhist way that are keeping them attached to the real world. So as you advance in ranks in the Dustmen, you become less and less emotional, less and less something other than a brain in a jar in a way. That's sort of just thought without any kind of emotion or feeling.
The dead do not get frustrated. The dead do not have wants. The dead are simply dead.
This has led the Dustmen to behave in a very unemotional sort of way. You know, in the Planescape Torment game, when you meet the Dustmen, it's sort of stereotyped that they just talk like this, that they don't really have any feelings, that they don't really do anything that is embracing the passions of life. They sort of live, they're the ones that kind of most resemble religious orders. They dress, and especially at least in the Planescape game, Torment game, and look the most like monks. You know, they have these drab gray or brown robes that they wear all the time. And they sort of say they shun the earthly pleasures to exist purely as thought without emotion. But you don't have to play the dead like that. You don't have to be this sort of... This is almost like a stereotype Dungeons & Dragons character that people have seen in games all the time. This sort of priest of death, or sort of doom and gloom sort of person who sort of behaves like this. I worship Thanatos, the god of death, and I do not feel anything, or something like that. It doesn't have to be like that. In fact, in the game, they actually make the the Dustmen to be kind of, arrogant jerks. You know, they sort of feign, in a way, in the game, being above everything and better than everything, but really it comes off that they're being kind of priggish and obnoxious to people, rather than being unemotional, and they're kind of haughty next to others. The Dustmen have some of the most interesting powers, I think, when you join the faction and advance along the ranks. One of the most interesting is their ability to have the Undead Truce. The Undead Truce means that a non-intelligent undead, that means excluding vampires and things like that, we're talking zombies, skeletons, wags, things like that, will never attack a Dustman, because there's some sort of peace that's gone on between the two groups where they're not exactly allies, so to speak, but they are not willing to fight one another. Now, intelligent undead, you actually get a positive bonus to your persuade or intimidate checks, and you become friendlier towards them if you're a Dustman, even if they're intelligent. But the unintelligent ones won't willingly attack you unless you attack them first. They also have a fascinating and very valuable ability that you actually get in Planescape Torment the game about speaking with the dead. That means you can take any sort of corpse or body and speak to it as if you were speaking to what it was when it was alive. And this is very important in the game. If you come to sort of like a burned, charred house, and there's just a skeleton left there, or a rotting corpse, but the Dustman can talk to him and see what he has to say. It's really pretty fascinating and really important. Dustmen, I think, tend to be among the more intelligent characters, more like wizards, I think, in a way that the Bleak Cabal attracts high intelligence characters like that. Not so much the physical characters like the fighters and the rogues. They tend to stay away from the Dustmen to some degree. Not entirely. I mean, of course they can join if they want. I don't know how you could be a druid and a Dustman. That would be kind of weird. But I think that they have a similar pool of people that join the Bleak Cabal, that join the Dustmen. They're the two closest groups. They have a very similar fatalistic, negative viewpoint about things. Although the Bleak Cabal don't believe there's any point in death, they're not going to actively seek or want death like the Dustmen do, because they don't believe that there's any point to it. The Dustmen also have a lot of similarities with the Doomguard, because ultimately the Dustmen would want everyone to sort of extinguish themselves and put an end to the cycle of birth and rebirth and end everything around them and embrace the true death of all things. And in a way they probably have a similarity with the Athar too, because the gods, they believe, are also dead and should embrace this cycle of death. The role of the Dustmen and Sigil is that they're the city's morticians. Their base of operations is the Mortuary, a place you get to explore in Planescape Torment, a gigantic building where they take in all of the dead of Sigil, and some people from the planes as well, and dispose of their bodies. This is actually pretty similar to something that was in Neil Gaiman's Sandman books. There's actually one section, I don't remember in which of the books, but they actually travel to a city that's a gigantic necropolis where all of the inhabitants are undead and learn things about how to dispose of bodies, all the different ways of burial, all the different ways of sending people off. It's sort of like a gigantic tomb city where undead-like creatures live. You can get a good look inside what I think is a brilliant interpretation of the Mortuary in Planescape Torment, and you can see that it's sort of an antiseptic, almost hospital-like place in the book, but it's a much grimmer, dark, almost dirty-looking place in the game, and it's filled with zombies. The undead are used as servants by the Dustmen, and they sort of admire the undead, which is really weird. Rather than being repulsed and disgusted, they actually think that the undead are sort of more pure than regular people in a way, that they have abandoned their earthly desires by becoming undead, and are very close to that unemotional state, that true death, that really is the ultimate goal of existence, they feel. Now, their enemies in Sigil, probably the number one enemy, in similar to the Bleak Cabal, is maybe the Sensates. The Sensates believe that, they have to touch and feel and experience everything, and this really, really grates on the unemotional, very intellectual Dustmen, who believe that life is meaningless and worthless, and that embracing death is the only way to truly achieve any kind of happiness. And they're probably really disgusted by the emphasis on the physical that the Sensates have, or even on just, not just physical pleasures, but emotional experience that the Dustmen probably consider pretty disgusting. They probably also don't get along too well with the Godsmen, who are sort of the polar opposite of the Dustmen. The Dustmen want to eventually embrace death and erase themselves from this existence, while the Godsman believes that the point of the universe is to constantly better yourself and make yourself bigger and better, and eventually becoming a deity or beyond. So it's sort of like they want to build and build and build and create, while the Dustmen want to contract and pull back away from that. Monks tend to be attracted to the class because of its strict law-based, very abandonment of passions, more of a traditional interpretation of a monk. The Githzerai, with their rejection of emotion and their intense focus on concentration and driving out all of the other distractions in life, find a lot to appreciate in the Dustmen, and tons of human are Dustmen too. Playing the Dustmen is a lot of fun, and having this sort of mastery or understanding of death is really interesting and a really important part of making a party, I think. I've played a Dustman before, I loved it, I thought it was fantastic, I really enjoyed it. Not as good as the Bleak Cabal, it's not perfect, but I really enjoyed them, they were a lot of fun. You know, they don't have to be all doom and gloom. There's actually a group of Dustmen called the Hopeful. You know, the orthodox opinion among the Dustmen is that there is only really the true death and then non-existence, you know, oblivion afterwards. But there's a group called the Hopeful that actually believe that after you die, after you achieve the true death, that you will be taken to the true life, a real life after this one. You sort of resurrected into that after you go through all these cycles of misery before the true death. Not a lot of them believe that, but still, you can play it that way, and it'd be a fascinating take on the character, you know, somebody who believes that everything is misery and darkness, but holds out this glimmer of hope that there's going to be something good at the very end of it, and real life after all of this.
The dead do not hope.
The leader of the Dustmen is Skull, and Skull is probably the strongest of all of the Dustmen, of all of the Factols in the entire city, not just of the Dustmen, but any of the Factols, any of the leaders of the factions, all of Sigil, because he's actually the founder of the Dustmen, which means that he's easily thousands of years old. He just appears in a sort of visage, and he's actually become a lich now, and he's a 20th level wizard who's a thousands of years old lich. He is essentially impossible to defeat. You know, it's if a group of adventurers went up against them, they would be dead almost immediately. He has, even without the untold number of magical items that he's probably gathered over the centuries, he is amazingly powerful, has an enormous number of spells. He is one of the most powerful wizards in existence. He can actually create an undead creature, a zombie or a skeleton, just by touching a corpse. Yeah, he doesn't actually have to say a spell. Just his touch on a corpse will raise it from the dead as a zombie to do his bidding. That's how powerful this guy is. He's probably also an unbelievably powerful wizard. He is the only creature in existence that knows a spell called planar projection, which allows him to project himself, like astral projection, into Sigil, which is theoretically impossible and forbidden by the Lady of Pain. To do something to subvert the will of the Lady of Pain takes an amount of power and daring that is unimaginable, that he can actually do this. And he does not have an astral cord, so it can't be caught and killed. And if you destroy his physical form in Sigil, who cares? He's got one where he really lives in the negative energy plane. And I really, really like Skull, and I think he's fantastic. Ultimately, the Dustmen are a perfect example of how exciting and deep Planescape is. Because ultimately they're a group that's sort of like the Doomguard that seem in a way evil. You know, they seem bad. They don't seize the gift of life. They're just evil and wicked, and they pull back from everything. They pull away from everyone. They don't want to engage in existence and believe that everyone should ultimately be dead. And playing them, I think, is really exciting, and they are done brilliantly in the Planescape Torment game and are a major part of the setting and the feel of that game. You know, you start the game in the Mortuary around there, the first people that you encounter, and they're amazing. I love playing as the Dustmen. I think they're a great group and really speak to how exciting and interesting and difficult it is to categorize the factions in Planescape. You know, are they good? Are they evil? Who knows? But you can play them in so many different ways. They're really, really fun, and I enjoy playing these fatalistic people, just like the Bleak Cabal. They're great.
Kai, don't you want to live?
I'm an animated corpse, a mockery of life. I do not have wants.
Because dead, because dead, because dead, a shine on night.